Good evening. I'm Ruth Langer. I'm Associate Director of the Center for Christian Jewish Learning here at Boston College and a member of the Theology Department. And on behalf of our center and on behalf of the School of Theology and Ministry's continuing education program, I want to welcome you to a talk by Rabbi James Rudin celebrating the publication of his book, Cushing, Spellman, O'Connor, The Surprising Story of How Three American Cardinals Transformed Catholic-Jewish Relations. Now, as I was reminded early today, but I knew anyway, Tu B'Shvat started this evening, and for those of you who are not familiar with it, Tu B'Shvat is a minor Jewish holiday. It is the New Year for trees, and a holiday that has become popular in contemporary Israel once Jews began living in a world which was once again operating according to the agricultural cycles of the land itself. Tu B'Shvat is the moment when usually spring begins to show its first inklings. Now, I happen to have snowdrops blooming in my backyard right now because we haven't had a proper winter this year. But in Israel, the almond trees start blooming, and if you've ever seen almond blossoms in the midst of a bare land, it's stunningly beautiful with these very fragile pink blossoms. So this is a moment of turning and transition, and this is a wonderful metaphor for what Rabbi Rudin is going to speak about tonight, because he's going to be talking about not changes from winter to spring outside, but changes from winter to spring in terms of the relationships between Catholics and Jews and the contributions of these three American cardinals to that change. Before we get to him, though, we have two other speakers, briefly, and my task is to introduce the first of them, namely Martin Kaplan, who was a native of Rochester, but came to our great city of Boston to go to Harvard Law School, and I gather he stuck around after that, serving first as a clerk and then having a legal career with a local firm called Hale and Dorr, now Wilmer Hale. But in the course of that, he's also been, as many of you are, I'm sure, aware, a quite significant player in all sorts of public roles. He was chair of the Massachusetts Board of Education under Governor Weld, and has been a proponent of education reform in Massachusetts. He was the 2010 recipient of the Thomas Berry Award for his leadership in the field of religion and ecology, also a suitable theme for Tu B'Shvat and its theme of ecological renewal and spring. He also served, and this is how he comes here tonight, served as the Interreligious Affairs, as the chair of the Interreligious Affairs Commission of the American Jewish Committee for 5 years, and in this capacity, he worked closely with Rabbi Rudin, who was at that point the director of that office, focusing especially in Catholic-Jewish relations. So in this capacity, we welcome Marty Kaplan to speak briefly and introduce our other speakers.
Thank you for that very gracious introduction, and certainly the Center for Christian Jewish Learning and the School of Theology and Ministry at BC have played major roles in the transformation from winter to spring in Catholic-Jewish relations, and we're all aware of that and respect and appreciate it greatly. We don't have to revisit the centuries of hostility between Christians and Jews, but because we want to focus on the fact that the last 60 years have been a revolution, literally a revolution, since Pope John the 23rd arrived on the scene in the late 50s, followed by Paul VI, who saw the completion of the Vatican II Council, and Pope John Paul, who referred to John Paul II, who referred to Judaism as the elder brother of Christianity in religion, and Pope Benedict. All four of them of course, lived through the Holocaust and World War II and have been extremely sensitive to the issues of relations with other faiths, and particularly the relations with those with Judaism. In addition, there's no single event of any greater significance in this period of 60 years than the adoption of Nostra Aetate in 1965 at the Second Vatican Council. And the story of how it happened and what made it finally get done has not fully been documented in a book until Rabbi Rudin's book that is just out now, which describes the significant role of both Cardinal Spellman and Cardinal Cushing, New York and Boston, and they were rivals like the Yankees and the Red Sox, with plenty of tension between them from time to time in their careers. But both of them were critical in being insistent that the Vatican II Council, with many bishops from around the world who didn't know of the Holocaust, they didn't live through it, they were from other continents, but making them sensitive to the importance of it, and based upon their own experience, pushing it dramatically for a conclusion that led to its adoption. And I remember in 1965 what a significant event that was. 40 years later, the American Jewish Committee leadership, including Rabbi Rudin and others, were in Rome at the time with Pope John Paul, and had the pleasure of visiting at the residence of the American ambassador to the Vatican, our former Mayor Ray Flynn, who is with us tonight and who will speak and who played a significant role in all of the Jewish-Christian relations. He knew Cardinal O'Connor, he worked with Jim Rudin, and he certainly was a leader in this city. Now, as you all know, as you may know, Cardinal Cushing was a freshman at Boston College after he was at BC High School. And he was a freshman on this campus the first year this campus in Chestnut Hill was open. It probably had about 4 little buildings that are probably still remaining, but the growth of Boston College has been the growth of one of the great universities in America, which has become a significant force in American education and not just in Catholic higher education. Cardinal Cushing went on to the seminary and was a great pastoral leader in this community. I remember well when I first moved to Massachusetts in 1961, and he passed away in 1970, what a demonstrative, emotional, pastoral leader he was. And everyone felt the presence of this great cardinal in this city. He was not someone who stayed in the office and dealt with the powerful people. He was out with anybody he wanted to be with, in addition to the powerful people. And he, of course, was a great person in connection with helping us all heal following the assassination of his friend, President Kennedy. Before I introduce Mayor Flynn, though, I have the pleasure of reading a letter regarding this book, a letter to Rabbi Rudin, from the Cardinal Archbishop Sean O'Malley of Boston. Dear Rabbi Rudin, allow me this opportunity to express my prayerful greetings as you gather with friends and colleagues to mark the publication of your new book, Cushing, Spellman, O'Connor, the surprising story of how 3 American cardinals transformed Catholic-Jewish relations. Though I am not able to be with you today, please know of my congratulations at the publication and my gratitude to Boston College's Center for Christian Jewish Learning and School of Theology and Ministry for hosting this event, and we too are grateful for that. It is good to know that your study of the distinctly American Catholic contribution to the development of Catholic-Jewish relations recognizes Cardinal Cushing's important role. His positive regard for and personal relationship with members of the Jewish community helped to pave the way for the Church to embrace the teaching of the Second Vatican Council's document, Nostra Aetate. During the course of meetings with our local Jewish community, I have noted the significance that Nostra Aetate was approved by an ecumenical council. The Catholic Church holds documents of that status to be the product of the Holy Spirit, who assists, illuminates, and corrects the human process of reflection and decision. It is therefore the Spirit of God that informs the text of Nostra Aetate. For Catholics, our fidelity to our own vocation, our response to God, calls on us to embrace this teaching. There can never be a question of retreating from Nostra Aetate only reflection and discussion regarding the means of going forward. We pray that your conversation today will contribute to that mission that we hold sacred and dear. With the assurance of my prayers and best wishes, I am sincerely yours, Sean O'Malley, Archbishop of Boston. Now, we now have the pleasure to hear from Mayor Ray Flynn, who has a comment regarding this book, calling it insightful and riveting, and it indeed is almost a page-turner in terms of the story of how Nostra Aetate was adopted and the role that Cardinal O'Connor subsequently played in Jewish-Catholic relations. Mayor Flynn grew up in South Boston, was a national basketball star at Providence College, probably played on the BC campus. He was, fortunately for the history of Boston, cut from the Boston Celtics because that enabled him to have an important political career in this city. I first met him because he ran a seminar, a program at Harvard College for undergraduates, and my son, now an adult, was the liaison with Mayor Flynn, and he called me one day and said, do you know Ray Flynn, who's a member of the city council? I said, no, I don't. He said, well, he's going to be the next mayor of Boston. He's going to be a great mayor. I said, I don't know. I mean, I've never met him. So I met him, and Wendy and I were supportive of his campaigns. He was elected mayor in 1983 and 87 and 91. And if you recall the history of this city, it was a city that was very divided along racial lines, and Ray Flynn played a very significant role in knitting this community back together. He then became the ambassador to the Vatican, appointed by Bill Clinton, and served well beyond the normal 3-year term, 4.5 years, as the ambassador to the Vatican. But in addition to all of that, Mayor Flynn has memories of Cardinal Cushing from his days, even as a young person, and we've asked the great mayor of Boston to say a few words. Mayor Flynn.
Thank you, Marty. Good evening, everyone. It's an honor to be with Rabbi Jim Rudin and all of you tonight to talk a little bit about, well, I guess I knew two of the featured people in the book, both Cardinal Cushing and Cardinal John O'Connor. I'll tell you, Jim will talk about the book, but I mean it when I say the book was riveting and very insightful, and I think it's an incredible read for students or people who really want to know this relationship, the history of this particular relationship between Jewish community and the Catholic Church and Catholics. I come from the same church in South Boston as where Cardinal Cushing was from. I was confirmed by Cardinal Cushing, and I even sold newspapers to Cardinal Cushing. I was a member of the South Boston Boys Club, and then they would let some of the kids give them license to sell newspapers. I had Fenway Park, Boston Garden, Braves Field, and Blindstrup's Village. Blindstrup's Village was the oldest and the largest nightclub in America. It was owned by Stanley Blindstrup, who lived right over here in Chestnut Hill. So Cardinal Cushing, I might add, is Bishop of Boston at the time, I believe, but he was Archbishop of Boston. He was the only one that ever gave me $1 for a 3-cent newspaper. That's how I remember Cardinal Cushing. Jim, you missed that point in your book. The book is fantastic. I really believe that. There's not a lot of extraneous information that people have a hard time getting through. It gets right to the focus of this special relationship that I grew up with, quite frankly. But I don't know where the antagonism developed between Jews and Catholics, but nonetheless, I realized that it was a significant problem before Vatican II. And because I heard Richard Cardinal Cushing on a number of occasions, and it's just the way we were brought up, this was a special relationship that he had. He was the great healer, and I think, in fact, Marty mentioned that I was a healer in Boston. In fact, I think I got a lot of that from Cardinal Cushing, Richard Cardinal Cushing, because he was, in fact, a tremendous healer, and I'm proud of that because of the fact that we live two streets away from where he was born and where I grew up. So I'm pleased that we have something very, very much in common coming from that same community. Could I stop and just tell you one little story, because I've not had the chance to tell this story before. It was, I don't know, it might have been 1994, 1995. Bill Clinton was president of the United States, so he has these White House parties on St. Patrick's Day. So I was at the White House, and I had to get back to the Vatican the next day, because that's a big day at the Irish Pontifical College. And I was hosting a party at my residence on the St. Patrick's Day itself. So I got three big, Kathy will tell you, my wife, I got three big corned beefs, kosher corned beefs, and I brought them back on the plane with me to the Vatican. And I love writing, and I think I have a pretty good imagination, but on this particular St. Patrick's Day, I think I even exceeded my own ability that I understood. I had the St. Patrick's Day honor to honor the chief rabbi of Rome. Now, the chief rabbi of Rome is the very famous Rabbi Korf, who was the one that John Paul II was the first one ever to visit, first pope ever to visit the synagogue right down there by the Tiber River. A very historic occasion. And I used to talk to John Paul II. I was very close to John Paul II long before he was pope. He came to my town in South Boston, and I knew him when he was Karol Wojtyła, Archbishop of Krakow. Well, here I am on the plane going back to the Vatican with my corned beefs, and I had this party in the honor of the chief rabbi in Rome. So now all of a sudden everybody gets the invitation, one of those beautiful gold seal invitation, and people saying, what in the name of heavens is this? In order for us to celebrate St. Patrick's Day, the United States ambassador to the Vatican is hosting a party at his residence, and it's in honor of the chief rabbi in Rome. And the people saying, what in the heck is going on here? What's the connection? Nobody could figure it out. Well, we had I invited all the top diplomats from throughout Rome, Catholic Church officials, 4, 5, 6, 7 cardinals. We had an incredible party at my residence. And of course, the wine was flowing, and we had just a grand old night. But the next day, we all took turns toasting the rabbi, and it was very, very colorful. It was really hilarious. But the next day, and I get up and started singing. And the song that I would sing would be "A Mother's Love is a Blessing." Now, if you know the Irish, you know we love to sing sad songs, and you know about this song is about a mother passing away, and her son is thinking of her, and so forth. Well, I was singing all these songs. "A Mother's Love is a Blessing." Cardinal John O'Connor was there. He gets up and starts singing, "Goodbye, Mother dear, when you're far away." And so these are the songs. There wasn't a lively song about either one of us. So then the next day, the Jewish paper in Rome contacted the rabbi, and they says, "Rabbi, we got this invitation here. We're trying to figure out why were you honored at this American ambassadors for St. Patrick's Day in Italy, and did you like? Was it a nice event? What was the event like?" He says, the rabbi is quoted in the paper. He says, I have no idea what kind of party it was. All I did was cry all night. So that's where your tax dollars were going, by the way, supporting me in the Vatican, so I could honor the chief rabbi of Rome. This rabbi, by the way, you must have met him, Jim. Yeah, I think that was his father, who stood on the steps of the synagogue when Adolf Hitler came into the Vatican, into Rome. And he told him to close the synagogue, and he refused to. He's a little man, but he stood right up there toe-to-toe with Adolf Hitler and his entourage. An extraordinary, extraordinary man. Let me say this in closing. I'm deeply honored to be here with you tonight. I've always tried to do what I could to bring this special relationship together. But far more important than that, I think this book does that. I think this book hits it right out of the park, because let everybody who's inquisitive about this, or have heard stories about Catholic and Jewish relations, let them read this book, and they will learn the real history, not some radicals or some crazy people making up stories, but the real history. There were many things that should have been done years ago, and there are a lot of people at fault, particularly looking the other way to the Holocaust. But this book, I think, is going to begin that healing process that we all need. Jim, thanks for writing this book. It's a great book.
It's really a pleasure to hear Mayor and Ambassador Flynn speak again. It reminds us all of the magic that he had when he was the mayor and the ambassador. And a lot of that credit, though, also goes to Kathy, who is here this evening. So thank you, Kathy. I do want to thank the Center and Ruth and Camille Fitzpatrick Markey for hosting this event so effectively and graciously, and we very much appreciate that. I first met Jim at the American Jewish Committee, where he was the director of interreligious relations, but he was born in Pittsburgh, grew up in Alexandria, Virginia, attended Wesleyan, graduated from George Washington University. He received his master's degree and rabbinical ordination from Hebrew Union College, and he completed studies he has honorary degrees from St. Leo University, St. Martin, and others. In his position at the American Jewish Committee, which came about after he was a chaplain in the United States Air Force, where he knew many of the other chaplains, including the chief chaplain of the United States Navy, who became Cardinal O'Connor, and who was chosen out of his position as chief chaplain of all the United States military services to be the cardinal. And so Jim and the cardinal both ended up in New York together and worked together very effectively. Jim was the director of the American Jewish Committee Interrelations program, and has a long history of working on issues relating particularly to the Catholic Church with Cardinal Cassidy and others, and also with the evangelical churches, the Eastern churches, and others. He also played a role in the various amendments that took place in the Passion Play at Oberammergau that took place every 10 years. He has a significant history. He's the author of over 10 books, and he is accompanied by his wife, also an author, Marcia, who is here this evening, and it's a pleasure and an honor to welcome a great author and rabbi and leader, Jim Rudin.
Well, thank you, Marty, for that incomplete, inadequate, and limited introduction. First, I want to comment on the Super Bowl. Rabbi Langer mentioned that this is, in fact, the new year for Jews, for the trees. But in the summer, there's another holy day. It's called Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av. And on that day, which marks the destruction of the first and second temple, we Jews read from the book of Lamentations. And we were in Boston this afternoon, Marcia and I, and there were many people on the street reading both in Hebrew and English. Echa, which is the opening word, how the city doth sit in solitude after Sunday. But I have hope for you. As you'll soon discover, there's someone in the audience that goes back to Alexandria with me. I was a fan of the Washington Senators for many years, the old baseball team. Maybe the mayor will remember it. Horrible team, miserable team. And there it was there that I learned the chastisements of God are righteous and true altogether. The year between the time I graduated college and started Hebrew Union College, I worked, had the best job I ever had in my life, better than the American Jewish Committee. Worked for a sportscaster for the Washington Senators. Maybe Kim McCulley will remember, Bob Wolf. And that was the year that the Red Sox finished fourth. But I'll mention some of their names because I used to get them to come to Bob Wolf's TV show, and we would give them, at that time it was very cheap, we gave them neckties and cologne and maybe a men's suit. And the names you'll remember in Boston, at least you better remember them. There was Ted Williams, there was Jimmy Pearsall, there was Mel Parnell, and the manager was Pinky Higgins. They finished fourth. We know who won that year, 1955. I don't have to say the name, about 220 miles south of here. But it was there that I learned the chastisements of God. So I would say next year it should be better for you. Maybe the Patriots will finally win another Super Bowl. But the city was in mourning today. We saw a flag at half staff, and I don't know what that really meant. I want to thank Jim Bernauer and Ruth Langer and Camille Markey. What a fantastic job you've done to get these people to come out on a cold Tuesday night. We flew up from Florida last night, so it's very cold for us. Camille was terrific. Ruth, Jim, they all worked. Everything was prompt and clear and terrific. And I'm glad we finally met, Marty and I, we finally met Camille tonight. And thanks for the hospitality and for the planning and for the interest in this book project that Marty Kaplan hatched up for me some years ago. And, of course, as was said by the mayor, Richard Cushing attended BC High School. He attended a couple of years here at Boston College before he went to the seminary. So it's very appropriate that we meet tonight at the launching of the book that features Cardinal Cushing here at Boston College. Rabbi Langer and I share a couple of things besides being both Reformed rabbis and graduates of Hebrew Union College. We were both born in Allegheny County in Pittsburgh, which gives us a certain Midwestern dignity, and Western Pennsylvania. And I really want to thank her again, and Camille and Jim, because to put all this together takes a lot of effort and work. And now Marcia and I are thrilled to be here tonight. My wife's father, Dr. Max Kaplan, taught for some years at Boston University, where Marcia attended and achieved membership in Phi Beta Kappa. And the Kaplan family, then lived in Newton. There are three other Jewish women who play a very important role in my life. One of our daughters, Rabbi Eve Rudin, is also a graduate of Hebrew Union College, and she attended Brandeis University and did her thesis work with Professor Jonathan Sarna. Her sister, Jennifer, is a casting director of TV and films and the stage, and she's always looking for people who can sing, act, and dance. And I would say these are very important traits for rabbis, for priests, for ministers, for college professors, to sing, act, and dance, and even, I dare say, for attorneys and for mayors. So if you've got talent in your family, Jennifer Rudin is the person for you. And the fourth Jewish woman is 11 years old, and all of the rich royalties that you're going to contribute tonight by buying this book will all go to her. She's 11 years old, and she's going to make her debut this spring in the 6th grade production of her middle school of The Music Man. So who knows what lies ahead for Emma. When I was educated in Virginia, the Boston, and particularly the abolitionists here, were sort of an anathema to the teachers I had in grade school. Indeed, I had a 5th grade teacher, since it's almost February the 12th, we had a 5th grade teacher who could not pronounce the name, would not pronounce the name of the 16th President of the United States. She didn't even call him that. She said, this is the 16th federal president, as if there were, lots of Confederate presidents as well. She could not say the words. And so I was raised in that Confederate-style atmosphere where Boston was seen as a kind of hotbed of anti-Southern, anti-Confederate, maybe it's true, abolitionists. And but Marcia brought balance to my life because she was raised in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, and we know where the 16th President of the United States came from. And if you look at any Illinois license plate today, there's an image of the 16th federal president on those license plates. I dare not mention his name either. I want to thank Wendy and Marty Kaplan. It was in an Italian restaurant in Manhattan about 3 years ago that we were having dinner in New York City, as I said, and Marty suggested this book, the whole idea of these 3 cardinals, all American, all born in the United States, and he suggested that these 3 cardinals really were not getting their fair shake because they were so influential in 2 generations apart. One, Cardinal Cushing, obviously, Cardinal Spellman, both natives of Massachusetts, for the Second Vatican Council that concluded in 1965, and a generation later, Cardinal John O'Connor of New York, another Archbishop of New York, following Cardinal Spellman and Cardinal Terence Cook. He was born in Philadelphia. And so Marty said, write a book about these 3 cardinals, and I had never put the 3 of them together. And so I owe Marty a great debt, which I talk about in the book. To the mayor, Ray Flynn, thanks so much for that wonderful endorsement on the back of the book, and now your oral endorsement as well. He was an All-American, as you heard, at Providence College. The Friars, right? The Providence Friars. I was too short to play basketball, and so in college I was on the wrestling team when I weighed 123 pounds, and I ran track in the 2-mile, and I would urge all of you to run track. It keeps you thinking, and when you do 2 miles, you go around, you think of book titles, and so you go 8 times around, you do very well. I want to also acknowledge the presence tonight, Dr. Marvin Wilson. Unfortunately, his wife, Polly, can't be here. Marvin and I have contributed, where is Marvin? Marvin, way over there. Marvin and I have collaborated on many, many Christian Jewish conferences. We edited some books together. And Eerdmans is and I'll have more to say about our publisher in a minute. We share a publisher, Eerdmans of Grand Rapids. Now, Marvin has a beard and I don't. And sometimes we'd go to a Christian-Jewish meeting and we would deliberately switch roles. And I would say, I'm Marvin Wilson, evangelical scholar from Gordon College at Wenham, Massachusetts. And Marvin would say, I'm Rabbi James Rudin. And because we knew each other's script so well that we could have interchanged very nicely. So, Marvin, would you stand up so we can see you? Where are you, Marvin? Thank you. Marvin has written a great book. It's now in 7 languages. sold over 100,000 copies. It's called Our Father Abraham, The Jewish Roots of the Christian Faith. It's a great book, and he is a world-class Bible scholar who is in your neighborhood at Wenham, at Gordon College, and his PhD is from Brandeis University, where he studied under the great Dr. Cyrus Gordon. So there's a lot of interconnections here tonight and in this book. Also want to acknowledge the presence of, I know it sounds like we had a primary in Florida a few weeks ago, and it's going to take this long to get through to say thank you to everybody in a concession or a winning speech. But David Michael is here, and he represents Cardinal O'Malley, and he brought the wonderful letter to us. And Father David Michael does ecumenical and interreligious work for the Archdiocese. Thank you. And although I don't think he's here tonight, I want to also acknowledge the presence, Sherry, come in, of the presence of the work of the Archdiocese Archives in Braintree. I was there a couple of years ago, and its great director, Francis Lally, many of you may know him. He gave me his time, and he gave me his working space, and above all, he gave me extraordinary access to the Cardinal Cushing personal papers. So when Mayor Flynn tonight said, you really got Cardinal Cushing right, I owe a lot of that to the archives, because when you read through his personal papers, not the public stuff, but what he was writing to Jacqueline Kennedy, to Rose Kennedy, to Joseph Kennedy Sr., to not just the Kennedys, but to the little children that he ministered to and raised monies for, a great charity. You get the picture of Richard Cushing comes alive very, very much, and I'll have more to say about him tonight. And then I want to call upon one who has known me longer than anyone else in this entire room, including my wife. That's Dr. Kilmer McCulley and his wife, Anina. Kim, who lives in Winchester, not Winchester, Virginia, but this Massachusetts, Winchester. Kim and I are high school graduates together, classmates of our high school in Alexandria. He is a renowned physician and internationally famous medical researcher. And Kim is living proof that you don't need an 8th grade to be brilliant. Alexandria was so poor when we went to school. You'll remember Kim. We went 7 years to elementary school, 4 years to high school, 16 years old. We were out. He went to Harvard, and I started at Wesleyan. So 11 years is all you need. You don't need 12. And Kim is living proof of that. And when I was in Middletown at Wesleyan, I used to come up to Cambridge to see Kim and his Harvard friends. And I had the great good fortune back in the last century, I won't say which year, to attend his wedding with Anina, who's here tonight. Kim has written 2 very good books that you should read. The Homocysteine Revolution and The Heart Revolution. And I won't belabor the point, but Kim has made it very clear, some wonderful research about B6, B12, folic acid. And I'm just honored you're here tonight because it brings back all kinds of memories of childhood at GW High School in Alexandria. So thank you. And finally, Marcia's first cousin and her friend Jim have just driven in from Portland, Maine to be here. And they're way in the back, but we're so delighted you're here. Now, surprise of surprise, I do want to say something about the book, Cushing, Spellman, O'Connor. This book is an American trifecta. And why do I say that? Think about it. Eerdmans of Grand Rapids, Michigan is basically started out as an evangelical Dutch Reform publishing house in Michigan. Here's a book written by a rabbi about 3 famous American cardinals. So you have all of this put together, evangelical publishing house, rabbi, author, subject, 3 American cardinals. It's one of those only in America stories. Now, what's the takeaway from the book? Mayor Flynn was very kind. First of all, I would tell you, and make it as clear as I can, that being a conservative in theology, and these three men certainly were, does not mean, and I want to make it as clear as I can, does not mean that a person cannot make an historic contribution to improving interreligious relations. You do not have to be a progressive in theology to achieve that. There's often a myth that somehow you have to be a progressive in either theology or philosophy to make a breakthrough in Christian-Jewish relations. And it's my thesis that Richard Cushing, Francis Spellman, John O'Connor, all theological conservatives disprove that thesis. The second point, which is probably very clear to all of you, their achievements, which I'll highlight in just a minute, their achievements really shows American pluralism at work. What's central to all three of them in their lives, and they were very different men, very, very different personalities, and operating in two different generations. But all three of them, and it becomes clearer and clearer as I got into the research, all three of them knew Jewish people as flesh and blood, human beings, and not as metaphysical constructs or as targets for conversion or as, quote, Old Testament people. They knew Jews, the good, the bad, the beautiful, and the ugly, up close. In the case of the Archbishop of Boston, Cardinal Cushing, he had a Jewish brother-in-law that many of you knew or know of, Richard Pearlstein. You know also that he excommunicated Leonard Feeney, who used to parade on Boston Common with anti-Jewish and anti-Protestant and a lot of anti-other things, and he was excommunicated when Archbishop Cushing was the Archbishop of Boston. Last Friday night, where Marcia and I live on Sanibel Island, at Sabbath services, Shabbat services, Richard Pearlstein's great niece was in the congregation. She lives in Massachusetts, and she was thrilled to read on page 66 about Cardinal Cushing's sister being married to Richard Pearlstein. And there is a part of Cushing that is so almost simplistic and yet very profound, and I put it in the book. This is how he operated, and I saw it in the papers when I went to Braintree to the archives. I love my sister Dolly. God loves Dolly. Dolly loves Richard. Therefore, QED, I love Richard, God loves Richard, and I love Richard's people. Now that sounds, like something you'd make up, but that's how Cardinal Cushing operated time and time again. He is also reputed to have said, I couldn't get the quote, so I couldn't put it in the book. I don't have it. He's supposed to have said when he went to the Vatican Council to give the speech of his life on September 28th, which is Marcia's birthday, in 1964, a great speech he gave to his fellow bishops to pass Nostra Aetate, and he said it in the strongest possible terms in Latin. He's supposed to have said privately, and you'll love this, if we don't bring home the bacon for the Jews on this issue, I can never come back to Boston. Now, if you can get that quote for me, we'll put it in the second edition. But that is, I think he probably did say, because that's pure Cushing. That's exactly the way he would operate. The third point, the first about their conservative theology didn't keep them from making breakthroughs. The third point is, and this is for some people in this audience, not for all, you're never too old to do good. Let me say it again. You're never too old to do good. Because these three men achieved their breakthroughs in Catholic-Jewish relations when they were in their 60s and into their 70s. Think about it. They were at the end of their careers. They had reached the pinnacle. The Archbishop of Boston, 2 archbishops of New York, members of the College of Cardinals, princes of the church, widely known, and in the case of Cardinal Cushing especially, widely admired. So why did they do it? Why did they throw literally their red hats into the ring, and why did they work so hard in their generations for breakthroughs in Catholic-Jewish relations? They didn't have to do it at all. Now, I didn't know Cardinal Cushing or Cardinal Spellman. I never met them, only knew about them, but I did work very closely with Cardinal John O'Connor of New York. Now, let me give you their dates so you get some perspective. Cardinal Spellman was born in Whitman, Massachusetts, home of the Toll House chocolates, of course, in 1889, and he died in 1967. He became the Archbishop of New York from 39 to 67. The man we're talking about tonight was born in 1895, became the Archbishop of Boston in 1944, and he died in 1970. And my personal friend that I did know, John O'Connor, was born in Philadelphia in 1920, and he died in 2000. So they were all in advanced age, and certainly at the twilight of their careers, or the peak of their careers, and they did not have to do what they did. And now I'm going to conclude by telling you why they did it and what they did. In 1964-65, Nostra Aetate, this breakthrough resolution, declaration on the Church's relation with Jews and Judaism, was floundering. As Martin pointed out, the great John the 23rd had died in 63. Paul VI was Pope. They'd been working on this resolution and declaration for already 2 to 3 years. It was on very shaky ground. It appeared that it would be, if not defeated by the 2,800 bishops, it would be quickly tabled. And so at that point, Cardinal Spellman decided to intervene. Remember, America was at its peak of its power in 1964. And what he did was he went to the American Jewish Committee, an annual meeting at the Waldorf Astoria, and he gave a speech that only he could have written. Nobody wrote it for him. It's in the book. I won't quote it, but it's very plain spoken, straightforward. And he said basically, anti-Semitism, it can never be part of Catholicism. The deicide charge, the Christ killer charge, can never be part of Catholicism. And he urged the passage of the strong Nostra Aetate declaration. There's much more, but that was an important speech because this is Cardinal Spellman, very conservative, friend of J. Edgar Hoover, supporter of Francisco Franco in the Spanish Civil War, supporter at one time of Joseph McCarthy. I mean, you're talking far right wing. He was called Shepherd Number 1. Some of you remember. He flew around the world as the chaplain for the U.S. Armed Forces. Strong supporter of the war in Korea, strong supporter of the war in Vietnam, on and on and on. But on this issue, he was extraordinary. In 1949, and this I want to make very clear, 1949, Israel applied for admission to the UN, and that was very shaky. And Cardinal Spellman picked up the phone, and he called representatives of 18 countries with strong Catholic populations: Argentina, Colombia, Ecuador, Honduras, Guatemala, the Philippines. They're all in the book. And he made sure that they voted for admission of Israel in May 1949 to the United Nations. And I'm convinced that without that intervention, I'm not convinced that Israel would have gotten the necessary votes, even then with a small UN membership. And it was Cardinal Spellman who picked up the phone, made the calls, and then 25 years later at a dinner, he smiled when someone thanked him for it. It was Spellman's way he worked. He worked behind the scenes, except this one time he came out and gave this speech at the American Jewish Committee, which then the Pope said 6 weeks later, Cardinal Spellman speaks for me. That was the dam that began to break. But it wasn't enough. And here's where the Cardinal of Boston, in his finest hour, in his finest moment, in my judgment, made the intervention that counted. At that point, it was still very shaky in the summer of 1964. Was it going to pass? Was it not going to pass? Would the prelates from the Arab countries veto it, even though Israel was never even mentioned in the Nostra Aetate and is not in there? Or would the traditional anti-Semites of Europe, even after 20 years after the Holocaust, would they veto it? The drive of John the 23rd was gone. He was deceased. It was on very, very shaky, thin ice. And that's when Richard Cardinal Cushing decided it was time for him to go to Rome and make a speech. And he had to make the speech in Latin, which was not his language. And he didn't trust his priests in Boston, as I wrote. Not about the subject, but about the speech. And so he asked somebody in New York, Walter Abbott, to take his English, Cushing's English, put it in Latin so that he could go to Rome and give this great speech, which is in here, 1964, demanding that the church own up to many, many of the things it had to own up and get Nostra Aetate passed. And it did pass in October 65. So he gets the speech in Latin. He did not like to travel. He didn't go to Rome very much. Cardinal Spellman did. And he went to Rome, and apparently he got so close to the microphone, and many of you know and knew Cardinal Cushing's voice, he broke a microphone or something. He got so, and in this, I can't say it too loudly, the Boston accent that was his, he spoke this kind of Latin, which I think the people didn't understand, especially the Latin experts, but the speech was something else. I couldn't have written a better speech. Ruth Langer couldn't have written a better speech. None of us could have. It came right from Cushing's heart. And he basically said, after all that we've done to the Jewish people, this is the least we can do, and we have to do better. And he went on for a very short time. It was covered by the New York Times. He was the cover boy of the Time magazine, which at that time was a great honor. And this was a year after JFK had been assassinated. And so there was a great emotion about Richard Cushing at that time. And it was Cushing, in my judgment, that pushed it across. And it passed about 2,200 to 88 was the final vote for Nostra Aetate of the world's bishops. The speech is incredible. It's in my book. And it's something he didn't have to do. Didn't have to do it. So the final person, quickly, was John O'Connor. He was the Archbishop between 84 and 2000. He fought for the diplomatic recognition of Israel that the mayor was so much involved with. He was a foe of anti-Semitism. He was for Shoah remembrance, Kristallnacht remembrance. And on the very first year that he was the Archbishop of New York, the mayor has talked about the rabbi standing in front of the Rome synagogue. Well, Cardinal O'Connor stood in front of St. Patrick's for a different reason, but for a very important reason. The Soviet Jewry Solidarity movement would march down Fifth Avenue, right by St. Patrick's. And for years we knew that the Catholic leaders were in favor of it, but there wasn't a public expression of it until Cardinal O'Connor came to New York, and then he came out on the steps, waved to the passing parade, of which I was a part, and Marcia was marching, others were marching, and he gave enormous support. And one of the reasons was that he was a chaplain for 25 years in the Navy. He knew all about Jews, he knew all about Unitarians, atheists, agnostics, Protestants, Eastern Orthodox, and this was an important issue for him, and he made it very clear that he supported it. Marcia insisted that I put in, at the end, the words about his funeral. It was in May 2000, and at that funeral at St. Patrick's, which seemed to go on forever and ever, but he deserved it. President and Mrs. Clinton, Hillary Clinton, were there. Vice President Al Gore and Tipper Gore were there. Remember, it was an election year. It was the spring. George H.W. Bush was there. George W. Bush and Laura Bush were there. They were all there, and Marcia and I had a seat up front. And when the service was over, it was a very impressive service. And I'll quote from this. O'Connor, he died, as you know, of a brain tumor. And Marcia and I saw him the last time in January 2000 at St. Patrick's. Since many of you knew John O'Connor, since he was close to us in time, vigorous, strong, very, very charming. but when we saw him, he was weak. His hand, which had once had such a grip, was very, very weakened. And before he died, President Clinton awarded him the Congressional Gold Medal. O'Connor always described himself with only 4 words: I am a priest. And I write, maybe so, but he is the benchmark by which all present and future Catholic priests must be judged vis-a-vis Jews and Judaism. Over 3,500 people attended O'Connor's funeral at St. Patrick's Cathedral, including, and I mentioned, people who were there. When the lengthy service ended, the crowd stood and loudly applauded. The clapping continued as the Cardinal's casket was slowly carried to the crypt, located underneath the cathedral's high altar, not far from Francis Spellman's final resting place. These were three very outstanding people. We say in Hebrew, shlosha chaverim. Different types. They look different. They're not exactly dressed exactly in the same ecclesiastical garb. 2 from Massachusetts, 1 from Pennsylvania. They achieved immortality, in my judgment, because of the work they did in the last years of their lives in behalf of Catholic-Jewish relations. Let me conclude. I'll say that Marcia writes terrific novels. She writes award-winning plays and screenplays. And because she writes in fiction, she can create her own heroes and heroines. Fiction's too hard for me. I think it's Woody Allen who said, death is easy, comedy is hard. Well, for me, fiction is hard. Nonfiction is easy. I submitted this manuscript, and Marv Wilson will appreciate it, and waited and waited and waited, and 6 months went by, 7 months went by, and it was vetted and it was edited, and I hadn't read it for 7 months. Finally, it came back to me, and I read it through as if for the first time. And who emerged as the hero of these 3, in my judgment? Richard Cardinal Cushing. And I want to conclude with a couple words he wrote right after his magnificent speech at the Vatican, only this time he said it in English. And, you know, he's the man that said, I'm Boston born, I'm Boston bred, and when I die, I'll be Boston dead. He really didn't like to travel very much, though he did go to South America for his charities. He had trouble with his Archbishop, which we need not go into, though I talk about it. But at the end, he was a great hero. And this is what he wrote to Cardinal Bea, the Catholic cardinal, obviously the Vatican cardinal in charge of the Declaration on the Jews and Judaism we call Nostra Aetate. This is Cushing. I'm not a theologian, and I'm not a scholar, but I'm very close to people of all faiths. Unless the Council comes forth with a statement concerning the right of every individual to worship God in accordance with the dictates of his conscience, and with a statement relative to the fact that all people are responsible for the death of Jesus, and not a few Jews and a few Roman soldiers, the ecumenical spirit will be meaningless as far as the Catholic Church is concerned. We have now a wonderful opportunity in the pluralistic society of the United States to create the greatest goodwill for the Catholic Church. The Church has lived in the past for too long, for far too long. And then he wrote, let me say now, these 2 statements, religious liberty and Nostra Aetate of the Second Vatican Council, that give special consideration of the Jews, will of course be misinterpreted as simply political. It is not political. I pray that the final form will move all Catholics to greater love of their fellow humanity, fellow men and women, encourage the dialogue of the Church with other churches and with the Jewish community and other religions, hasten the unity and harmony of all of us in our modern world, which is too large for enmity and too small for isolationism. So that's the story of Cardinal Cushing, and I really appreciate your patience. You heard me out, and I thank you very much for coming tonight.